Hello everyone and welcome to this cold morning where we are talking to Venkatesh in our fourth episode of CL Uni-Verse, where we've been discussing ISB for the last 3 episodes, and this is the fourth one in the series of the same. We're going off ahead with the questions to now how to get into ISB in terms of, there are various requirements. You have to write a letter of recommendation, you have to write some essays, there are interviews. So how do you prepare for these things? What are the things that the ISB is looking for? And that is what Venkatesh will tell us, right? So Venkatesh, welcome to the fourth episode.
Glad to be here back.
Yeah. So Venkatesh, my first question to you. Okay, what really grabs the attention at ISB in terms of the essays that, and what kind of essays are we talking about?
Got it. Right. So for the benefit of the viewers, who might not be accustomed to the format of ISB application process. So there's a long application process which asks you for a lot of details of your family background, your work experience, your achievements, and a plethora of other stuffs. But one of the key element of that is the essay that we are talking about.
Right.
So essentially, ISB, just like any B school, global B school, asks for 2 to 3 essays, every year. So generally, one essay is optional, and there are 2 essays which mandatory everyone has to write.
Okay.
Right? These essays range. So these essays change every year. So the idea is that they want to know a little bit more detail about you, your personality, probably your experiences, your life in a format of
Life events.
Life events, exactly.
Right.
Now, these questions, as I mentioned, have changed over the years. So just to give an example of the recently concluded admission cycle, the 3 essays which were asked were, the first question was about the strengths and weaknesses that you identify in yourself, as well as giving a very candid explanation of yourself. So basically you had to tell what do you consider yourself to be like, right? Along with the strengths and weaknesses. That was essay number 1. The second essay was focusing upon one event of success, one event of failure, right? And then what were your key learnings from those major events.
Right.
And the last essay, which generally is constant across the years, is that why do you want to do an MBA and why ISB?
So what I see is there's an SOP based question.
Exactly.
There are life event based questions, and there are something which to do with your traits and achievements.
Yes.
Generally, can we say that this is what it encompasses?
Correct. So and also to just broadly talk about some of the other questions which have come historically in form of essays. There have been questions on what are your short-term goals and long-term goals. There have been questions on what do you bring as a trait for the cohort that will be joining in, and then how do you think that your presence in the cohort is going to impact other people.
So what is your contribution going to be?
So in different ways, in different permutation and combination, in different languages, they try to extract some interesting events, some anecdotes from your life, which could be personal, which could be professional, and try to see who you are as a person.
Right.
And obviously what your kind of goals are, why do you want to do an MBA, what motivates you to apply to ISB. So those things are essentially being broadly asked in form of essays.
Right.
Yeah.
So to write these essays, what would be those standout elements? मतलब वो क्या होगा जो which will make an essay stand out from a lot of other people's essays.
Correct.
And so how should a student think, or how should he come up with these kind of answers?
बिल्कुल. So I think एक चीज जो across all the essays, सारे जितने भी essays होते हैं उस पे constant रहती है कि आपको goal clarity रखनी है. Right. You cannot vacillate. आप भटक नहीं सकते हो अपने आंसर.
You can't be all over the place.
Right. चाहे वो ये है कि MBA क्यों कर रहे हैं, चाहे ये आंसर है कि यार मेरा फ्यूचर गोल क्या है, चाहे आपके स्ट्रेंथ्स हैं या चाहे वीकनेसेस हैं, राइट. फोकस ये है कि यार क्लैरिटी ऑफ थॉट है कि नहीं, राइट. व्हाट यू आर ट्राइंग टू कन्वे, जो आप बताना चाहते हैं वो एकदम क्लियरली बता पा रहे कि नहीं पा रहे हैं, राइट. वन थिंग जो बहुत लोग कंफ्यूज रहते हैं यार कि बहुत फ्लारी इंग्लिश लिखेंगे तो क्या अच्छा होगा. सो इट्स अ बिग मिथ, बिकॉज द आंसर टू दैट इज कीप इट सिंपल, राइट. सो इट्स नॉट अबाउट द jargons, it's not about the big words, it's about कि आप जो बताना चाहते हो वो ढंग से सिंपल इंग्लिश में भी अगर बता रहे हो तो आर यू एबल टू कन्वे दैट, राइट. with goal clarity.
It's more to do with the thought process clarity, if I'm not wrong, because that's what SOPs are generally about.
Exactly.
कि आपने क्या किया है, आप कहाँ जाना चाहते हो, and how does this thing that you're planning to do fit into that?
Exactly.
I think that is what it is about, right?
Correct. So now to just dig a little deeper into this and taking examples of the 2 essays, in fact 3 essays which I mentioned about, were asked this year in the admissions process. So if you look at the weakness, strength, or the failure and success questions, it's not about the event in itself. ठीक है, लोगों ने कुछ success किया होगा, कुछ failure किया होगा, everyone has something or the other.
हर एक का अपना बड़ा छोटा is according to themselves.
Exactly.
Right.
That's okay, right? It's not about the event. It's not about just what your weakness or failure is. They're looking at how are you able to relate it to, say for example, अगर failure तो क्या learnings हैं आपकी, right? Are you able to go into detail of
how you came out as a person,
how you came out as a person? अगर success भी है, बहुत बार क्या होता है, आपको लगता है success हो गया तो let's move on. But were you able to self reflect and see what you actually did? आपने क्या किया जिससे वो success हो पा रहा था, and maybe then sustain it in the future, right? अगर हम दूसरे example लें about your strengths and weaknesses, the idea essentially is कि आप strengths जो हैं वो आपकी strengths क्यों हैं, आपने ऐसा क्या किया है लाइफ में जिसकी वजह से वो strengths बनी है, and how are you ensuring that वो आगे भी strengths रहें, and अगर आपके weaknesses हैं तो how are you working upon improving them,
right?
So it's not about just a laundry list कि मेरी strengths ये हैं, मेरी weakness ये हैं, but it's a lot of things around that goes into the essay, which makes the essay stand out from the crowd.
Right.
Your life journey हुई, your honest opinion on क्यों है ये मेरा failure, क्यों है ये मेरी weakness, for example, right? That is going to stand out amongst the crowd. And as far as the last essay, because that is constant across the year, which is why MBA, why ISB, वहाँ पे तो सबसे ज़्यादा important है goal clarity. If you say things like कि मैं consulting भी करना चाहता हूँ, मैं marketing भी करना चाहता हूँ, मैं product management भी करना चाहता हूँ, the natural question would be then मतलब you don't have clarity, you're not clear, right? And then very important thing to note about in this essay specifically is that you have to go into very detailed about why MBA and why ISB का क्या aspects, चाहे वो courses है, कौन से courses आपको लगता है कि आपको help करेंगे, अगर right? Agar, is it say global strategy course? Is it going to be marketing research course? How will these courses from an XYZ faculty help you get to the goal that you want to reach to? How will your interaction with your cohort members or club members going to make you reach the goal, right? So essentially the idea is कि nuances में जाना है of what ISB brings to the table, and therefore very generic answers of बहुत बार लोग लिख देते हैं कि मैं अभी ये कर रहा हूँ, मेरे को ये करना है, and great cohort members and
great faculty members
will help me reach there. See, that is true, but it's a very generic answer.
It's such a superficial answer.
Yes, you can copy paste that to any other B school and
it will work.
It will work, but that's not what they're looking at. Have you done the research of which faculty teaches say the best marketing research, right? Have you done the research that clubs जो हैं वो कितने active हैं, उसमें कितना कितने sessions होती है, किस type of sessions करवाते हैं, what activity is happening there. So those things are very very essential in say the third essay to be particular.
Correct. Yeah. So this is where I am, because I've been a part of the industry for a long time, right? Education, and when we guide students to write these essays, so what we've understood is ये एक ही question पे लोग जूझते हैं.
Yeah.
They find it very difficult, because they are not able to go deep into their own plans or their own self or whatever, right? To dig and bring out a very strong answer. So I think that is a very important thing where students also need help.
Yes, for sure.
Yeah.
And I think and that is why see, a lot of times self-reflection helps, but if you have someone to talk to who you can kind of brainstorm ideas with, that I have done XYZ till now, how can I kind of
weave this into
a great answer or something which and in fact sometimes you get goal clarity talking to someone. And that's why sometimes admissions consultants become such an important part of your admission process.
Two good questions can also make you dig further into what you are already thinking.
Exactly.
Right. So
exactly.
True. That's great. So coming to LORs, letters of recommendation. So how does one go about that, and what are LORs in the first place, and then just tell us about एक student को LORs किससे लिखवाना होता है, कैसे लिखवाना होता है, how do we?
Yeah. So just like any other global B school, letter of recommendation or LOR is an essential part of the application process.
Right.
Many colleges ask for 2 letter of recommendations, some ask for 3, but ISB asks just for 1 letter of recommendation.
Okay.
Now, it's not a physical letter, as the term might suggest sometimes, that someone has to submit, right? Or, it's not even a document that someone has to submit. The process is very simple at ISB. Once you have, logged on to your application portal, there is a section of, recommendation, wherein you enter details of the person who you think should, recommend you. That person on their email will get a link, and the link will have a lot of questions that the person has to fill about you, right?
You're right.
Essentially, ISB is asking someone else than yourself to talk about you.
So what are those things that they are checking through an LOR?
Sure. So if you look into the LOR in detail, there are some objective questions generally which are asked, right? Which asks the recommender to rate the candidate on certain benchmarks such as leadership qualities, communication skills, quality output, how are you as a professional, would you rate the person in the top 10 percentile, 5 percentile, 1 percentile, and so on and so forth. So there are some objective questions, and then there are these long subjective questions. So there are generally 4 of them, right, which is asking, about how does the recommender actually knows the candidate, right? That is one question. The second question in general is about how is the candidate different from other candidates of similar nature or of other employees of the organization, for example. The third question generally is has the recommender given a constructive feedback to the candidate, on any occasion. And then the last question generally is any other information that the recommender wants to, give. So essentially, it's a long form with objective and subjective questions, and therefore the recommender needs to also, give some thought and time before entering all the details.
So which brings me immediately to this point. कि वो आपको जानना चाहिए, otherwise he cannot give you these answers.
Exactly.
So किस तरह the person should, how should the recommender know the candidate, how deeply, or whether you need a working relationship, or do you need to have, should it be a boss,
right?
Or please elaborate on that.
Sure. So generally it's a big question of candidates that who should recommend, right, as you rightly mentioned. And people generally come up with the fact that I know an MLA, I know an XYZ bureaucrat, right? Will that be a great recommendation, right? The answer is that the designation or the name of the recommender itself means nothing to ISB. As long as you have a great, working relationship with the person, that is what matters. So it could be your immediate manager at work, right? And that person, because of the fact that you work closely with the person for a longer duration of time, could be the best person to give the recommendation. You might know, say, the President of India and still may not, hold any value because the person is not able to give those nuanced answers. Right? Because as I mentioned, there are objective questions, there are subjective questions in which detailed answers are asked for. And the expectation also is that the recommender goes in some sort of details to tell that how were you as a person, what kind of attributes do you bring to the table, and that can only happen if you have a close relationship. Mostly, obviously the preferences of professional relationship, because a lot of time people say that I know this person from childhood, but it may still not be very, very good because
so a brother, friend, father might not be a great idea.
Exactly.
Right?
In a typical, say, professional setup, your immediate manager is the best person, I would say.
Right.
But there are other people, of course.
Could you just give some examples of other recommenders that you could go to?
Definitely.
Apart from a immediate manager.
Sure. So a lot of people definitely have this query that I don't want to tell my immediate manager that I am applying because of the fact that they might just not do a good appraisal of yours, or they might fire you in the rare other cases that that you basically want to leave the organization.
Right.
So therefore, a lot of people have apprehension going to the manager. Right? So there are many people you can go to. You can go to a previous manager. Like you might have worked in a previous organization, say a year back, and you might have worked for, say, a couple of years of or a year with them, and that becomes a viable option to go to. You might want to go to a senior colleague of yours, right? You might go
Not
to
the direct reporting, but who's worked with you.
Exactly. You can. So in fact, I myself went with a senior colleague of mine who I had a very good working relationship with. He was not a person I was reporting to, but I was working closely on a couple of projects with that person.
Right.
And therefore, the idea essentially is that the person should be able to give nuanced answer that I worked on this project with this person, or I've seen his work closely on say XYZ project, and it has been, say impeccable, whatever, right? And some qualitative and quantitative, aspects have to be brought front.
Right.
But the idea essentially is that they should have worked in some capacity with you in the past. Now, when I say past, sometimes people go way past. That I feel should be avoided.
So more recent past is preferable.
Yes, because if you go to a person who has worked with you 8 years back and you haven't had a working relationship with them, in the recent times, then the natural question occurs that whether that person knows who you are now.
Right.
So you have to find the right balance of that recent past, so to say, and yet finding the right person who has worked with you closely, mostly professionally, is the most preferred option, I would say.
Right. Yeah. Great. How to approach your potential recommender, if the one who I want to recommend me?
Sure. So, see, of course, if you are currently working with them, it's a natural, way to just approach to them, have a candid conversation that you want to do an MBA and are looking for a recommendation to kind of quantify and qualify your contribution since the last whatever months or years that you've worked with the person. And because you've worked with them closely now, it becomes I think most of the people are very, very helpful on that front, and therefore will appreciate and help you out, right? But if the person has worked with you in the past, then you might want to approach them a little in advance. Say sometime around when you are planning to start the application process itself, so that you can kind of talk to them on multiple touch points and kind of tell them your expectations, your aspirations of the future, and remind them also of some of the work that you have done with them in the past, because the idea is that some of the people who you have worked with may not remember details of the projects very specifically that you made a contribution on. And so of course because you can't write it for them, for them. So the idea essentially is that via conversation you can remind them of some of the anecdotes, so that
you can prompt
them in the right direction, so that at least they would have some remembrance and things to kind of write the recommendation on.
Fair. Right. So moving on from essays and LOR, right? Let's go to the third part, which is the most important part. That is the interviews. Right. So generally, what is the scene with the kind of interviews at ISB? Because every B school, every company has its own way of conducting interviews. So what is that ISB way of conducting interviews?
Right. So I personally have given multiple interviews across different IIMs, ISB, for the PGP program, the PGPX program, and so on and so forth. So if I have to draw a parallel, right, one of the things that makes ISB interviews different is the fact that the alums take the interviews.
Oh,
so it's not the faculty of ISB who is involved in the interview process.
So all alums, or is it a mix?
So very rarely you will find some faculty. Sometimes one or two faculty might be involved, but predominantly it's the alumni of the campus,
right,
who take the interview, and therefore the expectation is starkly different from what you will experience in an IIM, because where the faculties are involved, right? So largely I would say that there are three things that are tested upon in the interview process, right? The first major aspect is your work experience, because obviously the idea is that most of the people who are applying have good amount of work experience, so they want to know whether whatever you have claimed in your application process you have actually done, and do you know the ins and out of what you actually did, nuances of of the things that you have claimed that you have achieved, right? And get into the specifics of what was the day-to-day work like, and where was your contribution in the larger scheme of affairs. Right. In fact, I remember from my...
You can't get away by saying that there was a certain project done by me,
yes,
which is actually has a minuscule amount of input from you.
Exactly.
Right? So they go into the depth of it.
Yes. So
Okay.
just to give an example, I remember from my interview there was a question on. So I was working, in marketing before I went into ISB. So they went into specifics of what time frame for your channel was the best to launch the episodes. How did you kind of do product placement, influencer marketing,
Right.
and so on and so forth. So they go into those specifics. What they'll ask you metrics. What was the number of views? What was the click through rate? And those, and the major metrics that you kind of evaluate
Right.
your work upon.
Right.
So unless and until you have actually done things and thought it through before an interview, essentially, you might just, kind of fumble in remembering those specific data points or details of what you actually worked upon. So it's very, very essential for the candidates who are, interviewing for ISB to remember each and everything that they have actually worked upon. Probably go back to your previous documents from the past and see that what were the deliverables, what were the final outcomes, and what were your key contributions in the projects. So that is one, which is the work experience bit, right? Of course, apart from that, they this will be as a run up to your profile. So they might ask you something about your profile base in terms of tell me about yourself. They might ask you a few questions about your undergrad and so on and so forth. But largely, it is the work experience is a major bit that they test upon. The next thing that they will ask you, and which is very, very essential, in ISB interview, is why ISB, why MBA, why now.
So career clarity and SOP clarity.
Exactly.
Right.
And very important, first of all, it has to be in line with what you have written in your application, right? That is one.
Which is why, again, I come back to saying that writing the application is very important.
Very important. Right?
Because you can't goof up there, otherwise
Exactly.
you goof up your interview.
Exactly.
Okay, great.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Right. So therefore, you have to be very crystal clear on why MBA first, right? Why? In fact, I'll tell you, and this is a secret sauce, that the alums are actually told by the admissions team of ISB to grill you on this to the extreme, in which they will give you scenarios, hypothetical scenarios, to say that you can do this without an MBA. Why do you want to do an MBA?
Correct.
So unless and until you have that clarity of thought,
So just to give you an example, I hear a lot of answers. For example, I want to be an entrepreneur, so I want to do an MBA.
Yeah.
How does that connect? An entrepreneur does not necessarily have to have an MBA.
Exactly.
So what is your reason
exactly
for it?
Yes.
Right? So that is
Yes.
what we are talking
Yes.
about.
And in fact, मुझको याद है कि मेरा जो इंटरव्यू हुआ था उसमें मेरे से जो इंटरव्यूअर थे, मैंने बोला था कि बिकॉज आई वाज प्रिपेयर्ड, अच्छे से मैंने प्रैक्टिस किया था कि मैं क्यों एमबीए करना चाहता हूँ, आईएसबी मेरे को एमबीए कैसे हेल्प करेगा. उन्होंने मुझसे पूछ लिया गूगली फेक करके कि अच्छा 3 चीजें बताइए जो आप में अभी नहीं है, जो आपको लगता है आईएसबी में आकर के आपको मिलेंगी. Luckily, I was prepared for this answer, right? I had proper guidance back then, and I was prepared for this answer, and I went into detail. मैं detail में गया कि भाई A, B and C are the 3 things जो मैं अभी lack करता हूँ, जिसकी वजह से मैं जहाँ पे पहुँचना चाहता हूँ after ISB, वहाँ मैं पहुँच नहीं पाऊँगा.
Right.
And to fast track that, I need this skill set, and therefore these courses by this professor would actually help me get there. And they were really impressed by the fact that I went into the details of, into identifying the skill set gap that I have, and then how will ISB help me get there, right? So that clarity of thought, of nuanced ISB specific answer is something that they're looking at, and वो गूगली पे गूगली फेंकते रहेंगे. मतलब मुझे याद है एक मेरे फ्रेंड से ये भी सवाल पूछा गया था कि I'll tell you, this is very interesting, that so the person I think mentioned that मुझे consulting करनी है. So the alum said that I am from consulting, I like your profile, मैं तुम्हें अभी interview कराता हूँ after this interview at McKinsey or I think some other organization, and I'll give you an offer. Why don't you join me tomorrow? Now that person, because was prepared for this answer. See, just imagine if the person was not expecting this answer, they would be मैं क्या करूँ?
Right?
है ना?
Absolutely.
So that person went on to the extent to say that आप अगर मुझे अभी अगर नहीं ऑफर करिएगा, right? Obviously they went into to say that why ISB skill set gap क्या है, and वो सब चीजें तो मतलब जो आपको बता चुका हूँ. But they ended with the answer with this conviction that अगर आप मुझे अभी ऑफर नहीं करिएगा, तो in the round 1 of next year I will still be sitting here because I know that
this is what I want to do.
So that conviction you have to bring in your answers, with obviously the right data points, the right kind of thought process essentially. And just to kind of sum up, because I think I mentioned about 3 parts. The first part, as I mentioned, was your work experience. The second part was your why MBA, why now, why ISB, and the last part is general behavioral questions. So they might give you some scenario-based questions of, strengths and weaknesses. What do you want to do in the next 5 years? What are your career aspirations? They might ask you about, have you had a conflict situation? Have you dealt with that?
Right.
So basic, most top 30, behavioral questions that you can think of. One must be definitely prepared with those as well.
Right. So it's all about the preparation.
Yes.
So a lot of students have this in mind that interviews क्या होता है? They'll ask questions, we'll answer. देख लेंगे. It's not as देख लेंगे as you think it is.
Yeah.
Right. So
right.
you have to prepare and you have to go 5 levels below when you answer a question. I think so. That's what I tell my mentees, that when you answer a question, you go 5 levels below.
Yes.
कि और क्या questions आ सकते हैं?
Exactly.
Right?
Definitely.
Great. So now the next natural question which follows through is how do you prepare for these kind of questions? What is the thing you should do to prepare for these questions?
Right. So for the interview, as I mentioned, there are 3 types of questions, right? So first of all, you have to list down, as you mentioned, 5
levels.
So as you mentioned, 5 levels below तक जाना है आपको.
Yeah.
So you have to think that अच्छा मेरे को MBA क्यों करना है? Then अच्छा अगर MBA नहीं करूँगा तो मैं कहाँ जा सकता हूँ? Right? Why am I not able to reach to that goal now without an MBA? So all these basic, different scenarios you have to kind of think about and build your answers on that beforehand. So that at least these basic questions of why MBA, strengths and weakness, जो general आप सोच सकते हैं, you are prepared beforehand. Obviously, there are going to be new questions in the interview which you cannot prepare for, which you therefore kind of come up with the answers there and then. But the idea is that the basic questions जो हैं जैसे हमने discuss किया है, उस पे अगर आप पहले से prepare होके जाएंगे, you make pointers, you practice that in front of say a mirror or a camera, listen to yourself again and again, see that are you convinced enough as a viewer of how you are answering, and then better on that day on day.
And then expert feedback helps, of course.
Exactly.
Right. So okay.
So yeah, because what I mentioned is a day-to-day practice करने का तरीका, but then mock interviews are very important.
Absolutely.
And therefore, जितना आप mock देंगे with different kind of people, you may take mock interviews with admission consultants. You can do it with ISB alums. You can do it with a friend of yours. The idea essentially is to seek regular feedback on answers and
you
better the
and
answers.
I may say here, you may seek our help. Right?
Definitely, yes.
All right. So again, a very interesting conversation, and I thoroughly enjoyed this. This was a very special one because we discussed a lot about the essays and the interviews, which is an actual practical thing that you need to do to crack ISB. Right? So with this, let's end this interview at this note. Right? Wonderful having you as always, Venkatesh.
Same here.
All right. So we end the 4th episode here. I welcome you to attend the 5th episode on the series CL Uni-Verse that we are covering on ISB as of now, right? And the next topic that we are going to cover is PGP at ISB just a hype, or is there real crux in it? So that is a topic that we are going to cover in the next one. See you on the other side.